and welcome to In the Garden with Beth Burrell. Hi, I'm your horticulturalist here at Cedarfield, and we're going to be talking about container gardening today. We're going to look at some different choices that we can use for outside or on a sunny or perhaps partially shaded porch. And then we're going to touch on some choices that would be good for indoors as well, because not everybody has a place that's in an apartment to necessarily have an outdoor plant, but you certainly probably have a spot that you would like to have a nice indoor plant or plantings. But some of the first things that I want to go over are the basics to begin with. So just as I touched on, kind of determining what your light conditions are. If you're inside, do you have a brighter window area where you're probably getting more bright light to quite a bit of low light in your apartment? Likewise, if you're in a cottage or have an apartment that's on a ground floor where you may be able to get out, you want to look at your light conditions there as well. Bright sun, part shade, and shade. And then your light situation is going to help you determine what plant choices that you can use to put in your container. Next, picking out your container. This is one of the fun things that is part of the process. This is another one that I have. You'll see these up at our new community herb garden. They're very fun and whimsical. So when you're looking for your container, I always like to go bigger than smaller, because our plants are going to grow, they're going to put out more roots and more foliage, so they need room to expand and to explore in that container that they're put into. And I typically like to have several plants in the same container so that you can show off their color, their texture, and their habit within that container. Also, again, before we get started, some containers have, like this one, it doesn't have a drain hole already drilled in it. I turn that around, you'll see here on the bottom. Now that spot right there would be for you to take a drill and drill that out so that you have a hole or holes from which the water can drain out. This one also is nifty because it comes with this little elevated platform. And so this goes down inside the pot, and then that catches the extra water in the bottom. And that can help the number of times that you have to water. Now, assuming this has some drainage holes in it, whether it's for inside or outside, there are several things that will help not to have that messy runoff that happens after you water your plants. Now, one fun tidbit is a sponge. You can put a sponge in the bottom, as so. Cover your watering holes with that. The sponge not only will keep the kind of muddy water from draining out, it's also going to become a reservoir for your water to collect in, just like it does around the sink. It's going to absorb all that moisture, and then it will help release that moisture into the soil as it dries out. Another fun thing to use are our coffee filters. I just have to locate those. Here they are right in front of me. So a coffee filter is also a great little trick to use in your container. If you think about your coffee grounds or tea grounds, when they collect in your coffee pot, it holds them right in place. They don't go through the filter. Likewise, your soil is going to do the same thing. The water is going to drain through, but it's going to hold the soil in place, and any muck that may drain through is going to be left in your pot and not down here on your floor or walk or patio. And of course, coffee filters run about $1 or so for a whole pack that you can probably share with the entire community. So now we have our pot ready. It has holes in it. We have our filter in here. And this one is already, has all that in place. And now we have our potting soil in here. I like to use, let me put my gloves on before I get started. So I like to use a potting soil. It's actually a soilless mix. It does not have any soil in it. It has a combination of peat moss, it has perlite, which you can, not sure if you can see or not, very little particle here in my hand. And these are very puffy looking, look a lot like styrofoam. It's actually a volcanic product. It's very lightweight. So that helps absorb water into it, and it also adds porosity into the soil, so it's not so heavy. It makes it lightweight. There's typically a little bit of bark ground up very fine into the mix, so it's a nice organic combination of materials. And this, I'll just put a little scoop in my hand so you can kind of see the consistency of it. But you're not going to see big chunks of bark like the cheap potting soil. It's very nice, lightweight. Now, typically this comes out quite dry out of the bag. So you're going to want to add some water first to this. And then the next thing that I would do is then mix it up. Kind of like when we're cooking, we just mix all that up.
Technical difficulties, just a little.
Technical.
It's pretty good.
Thank you, Georgia.
Is that on the table? Okay, you're fine.
Good, all right. So I've added some water and just did a pre-moistening of that soil. So next, there is another piece. There's some things that I like to add to the soil, perhaps before I get started. This is a little-known product. It's called Super Moist. Sometimes it'll be called Super Sorb. It comes under some different names, and it's a moisture crystal. And you just take a little bit. I have some in a cup already. You can see it's these white little, looks like sea salt. Nice big chunks of granules. So I'm going to take about a tablespoon in my hand, and you want to do this ahead of time and just add it to some water. And we'll look and see what that does toward the end. But I would put that in water and it will swell up, and I would then add that to the soil. You want to do that before your plants go in. And what you don't want to do is to put it in dry like this, because it's very deceiving, and you will see why, how much this expands. A little bit makes a whole lot. And so you can turn your container into a oozing volcano if you put too much in it. So we'll watch that as we go along in the show. Next, a lot of soils, look on the bag. Some will say they have a slow-release fertilizer already added in the mix, which is wonderful. Some, however, probably don't. And so I like Osmocote in particular. It's a slow release. And so this, I'll show you what this looks like. It's a nice little granule here. It's a little round bead. And so that's a fertilizer granule. It has several coats of fertilizer. And so as I just sprinkle that in, and again, the amount is going to be different depending on the size of your container. And everything has some nice little directions on the back. So please read those so you don't over-fertilize your plants. But this is a nice combination of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Each of those which help in bloom production, root production, and your foliage. And again, I just work that into the upper surface of the soil, because that's where your new roots are going to be as the plant gets put in and as it starts to grow. So it wants those nutrients close by, not deep down in the pot. And each time you water, that granule lets go of just a little bit of fertilizer to get absorbed into those roots. And it makes it easy, so you can fertilize and forget for about 6 months when you use this. So this is definitely our friend when we're doing potting plants. So we have our fertilizer in place, it's worked in. So now we're ready to select our plants. So when I go to the nursery or garden center, I always like to sneak a peek at the roots. So, don't be shy. Take the plant out and take a look and see how your roots are. This one has nice, white, healthy roots. They're at the bottom here. This is an asparagus fern. And so if you take a closer look, you will see, I believe I'm having another technical, I think I need a bobby pin to hold that in place.
Maybe we need to put it behind your back.
Okay,
Because I think as you move your arms,
I think you're right.
and it's under your arms. I don't think you'll see those.
See, it looks good now, but I think as you move.
As I move,
Yeah.
it's moving.
Yeah.
So while George is getting me technically put together, I'll go ahead and talk about this nice asparagus fern. What's cool about this plant, it has nodules that develop, so it has these fleshy roots, and these are water reservoirs, kind of like what we think of as a camel hump storing water. These have these wonderful thick roots, and so these are very drought resilient, which is a big plus. We don't think about needing moisture resilient plants till we get this heat and humidity like we're getting now, and we are really getting it full wallop right in front of the face. So this fern is going to work in a fair amount of sun. It really doesn't like southern sun, but an east, west, or north exposure, it's going to be just fine. It'll take part shade, it'll take sun. So this is a nice versatile plant. One of my second choices that will work both for sun or part shade is this euphorbia. It's called Diamond Frost. This is an annual, and this fern is also an annual. So they're going to live for a growing season. If they're outside when we get a cold snap, then that will be the end of these plants. And so this little euphorbia just blooms itself silly from spring all the way till we get a frost. It is a non-stop bloomer. It is a nice workhorse plant, and I love it. It has a baby's breath feel to it. Nice, tiny, little white blooms, a wonderful light texture to it, yet nice and full and compact. And when we're putting together containers, there's a simple recipe that we think about following. So you have your thriller, which is typically perhaps your tallest plant or the plant that's blooming, and then you have so perhaps our fern would be our thriller, because it's going to kind of be the showiest piece or the more upright component in the container. Then you have your fillers. This is more bushy and full, so it's going to fill up in the container. And then our third piece of the recipe is our spiller. And that's going to be a plant or plants, which I think is very important for the look of the container, is something that's going to droop over the edge, spill over the edge, and soften that container. Likewise, this too. And so these are both annuals. So this is a variegated creeping fig. Beautiful little plant. It's semi-hardy around here in a container. It's definitely going to be tender. A number of our plants will not overwinter in a container like they would in the ground because we have cold coming at it from all directions of the container. So all this is either going to heat up when it gets warm, and it's going to cool down when we get lower temperatures. And so when I'm looking at my cascading plants, my spillers, I look for ones that already are starting to spill over their own edge of the pot, because I know then that's going to have a more instant effect when it goes into my container and have the right look. Let's open up this one and see what the roots look like on this one. I have a old, already has nice little roots coming out of the bottom here. And that's okay. I'll just come in and do a little root teasing, or tickle the roots. But you can't see those roots as much. They're a little bit darker than those other white fleshy roots, but that's nice and full. You can see those on the bottom. And I like to just pinch the roots a little bit. And you can see as I do that, the roots are now kind of pulling down in the pot. So you don't want your roots to what's called root bound or pot bound, is when your roots are taking the shape of the container. You always want to loosen those roots so that they go down naturally the way they're supposed to. If you don't loosen those roots, they'll continue to follow the pattern of the pot inside, and the plant won't grow as pretty as it should. It kind of stunts it. So that's important as well. So for this combination, I'm going to go for sun. And so I have a lantana. You can't go wrong with lantana. This is also more drought resistant. And this is really once they're established. When you first plant these, don't expect them to be drought resistant. They're newly planted. You have, if you tease the roots a little bit, you've pulled it out of the pan, pull it out of the pot, then you have, pulled on the roots a little bit, and so it has to go through a transitioning of getting into the new soil and starting to put out new roots, which will then bring on the new growth. So this lantana, this is one that's called confetti. And you can see it has beautiful kind of tricolor blooms. It has deep pink, it has kind of a peachy color, and also some actually kind of orange going into gold. And I just love that, of course. Now, big bonus with the lantana, they have oils in them that aren't attractive to pretty much most insects, so nothing bothers it. If you had it in the ground, you're not going to get little varmints going after it, chewing on it, or insects. So it's very resilient in that respect. And then the blooms are a great nectar source. So butterflies, hummingbirds, moths, and our bees, of course, many different native bees, gravitate and love this plant. But of course, the butterflies and the hummingbirds are some of the most special. And they're really fond of these. So you see these planted quite a bit around campus, different varieties, just for that piece. And then this is really just a plant. It's also, this is going to be a filler, as the lantana and the diamond frost euphorbia. And I like this because it gives us a different foliage color. This has a nice burgundy pink tint along with the green leaves. And so I really look at foliage color like I do flowers on the plant. Many times the foliage is my flower. It's going to last the longest and give you the most bang for your buck and give you some nice texture. This is an Alternathera, and you'll find these in gold, bronze. There's some that are mixed colors. And they're just a fun plant to use, have a beautiful little texture to them. You see they have kind of a cupped leaf. But you're not going to get a flower, you're just going to get this beautiful foliage. Okay, so let's put this together. And you can choose how you put your plants in the containers. A lot of times, I tend not to be as centered with a plant unless it's more of an evergreen or a conifer. I like to be a little more asymmetrical in my planting. So I'm going to just scoop out a nice appropriate hole. And when you plant, it's very important, because this soil is nice and light. I take this is why it's nice to have on those gloves, and just push that soil down. I don't know if you can see that or not, but you can see how much the soil has compressed around that root ball. So now I'm going to go back and bring some more soil around those roots and give it another good press to firm it in. That works out any air pockets and whatnot. so that you have all the soil in contact with the roots. Very important. Also, when you water, your soil also tend to lessen some of the pot because of those air pockets, and your soil level will go down some too. So I tend to put a little more soil in the pot to start out with. You can always take a little bit away, but it can be a little challenging after you have it planted. So next, I'm going to tuck in this lantana. And this is kind of a mid-sized grower, so this is going to take up a fair amount of space. So I'm going to bring it very close to the side of the container. And it's okay if it touches the side. I kind of like getting it very close there so it's further away from my other plants so they each have a little room to grow. I'm going to pull that soil in around the plant. Do the same thing. I'm taking my fingers and pushing that soil down all around the roots. Then I'm going to give it a nice firm. There we go. Tucked in, tight. And then, you can see that a little bit. Now I'm going to put my euphorbia in. So I've kind of made a triangulation with these three plants, as this one's going to go in. Take a look at those roots. They're nice and fine. I'm going to just tease those a little bit with my fingers, again, to break up those bottom roots before I put it in. Don't have to do a whole lot. Scoop out my hole. Tuck it all in there. Push the soil down, firm it in. That helps our plants stand up nice and straight too. Sometimes they'll tend to be a little floppy when they come out, and you can manipulate this. So you can see that's looking quite nice. And by having it on the turnaround here, you can kind of see which different ways that you could have your pot setting out. You can see the fern could be to the back, and these two more to the front, or to the side, as such. And then, so our variegated fig, this is one that also would like a more sunny disposition. So I'm going to take that and put this in between here. And I'm going to put this right on the edge. I'm looking at where my plant is spilling the most. You can see this other side's kind of not so attractive, but this side is very attractive. So this will go to the inside of my pot, where the other foliage from the plants won't matter what that looks like. Get that all tucked in. Then I go back in and just play with my foliage a little bit. Sometimes a little bit gets trapped under the corresponding plant as they go in. And now you can see how nice this drapes over the side here. And typically I would probably have a second one of those that I would tuck on this side as well, to have two cascading, or perhaps you could have three, and put one on the back side. That gives you a good idea of a recipe. Of course, the fern is going to continue to get some height to it as it grows. And the white variegation on this ficus is a nice echo of the white in the flowers over here. And you can see how we have this nice fine texture here. This is kind of a mid-sized texture. We have a different one with this coarse little variegated ficus leaf, and then a little bit more larger with the lantana foliage and its flower. So each one is a little bit different from the next. Now I'm going to leave those two. I'm going to leave my fern and my diamond frost euphorbia. I'm going to take out my ficus, and I'm going to take out my lantana. Because as I mentioned, these two are nice transitional plants. They'll take part shade to full sun. So now I'm going to put my Alternathera. This also will take part shade to a nice sunny disposition. So now we're working on a more of a part shade pot combo. And I'm going to tease those roots. And let's And remember, everything's gonna grow. Always again, it's been a little tight in the box where I had everything together, so I can just kind of gently hold some of that foliage down for a few seconds. That's gonna help open that up a little bit, not be so tight. Just give it a little massage. I want one. Okay, see how that opened up just a little bit more by just playing with it a little bit? Nice. And then this, it's got soil on it. This is called wishbone flower, is one of the names for this. And if you look inside the flower, if we take a close-up here, if you look inside, you can see a wishbone little structure on the inside. Can you see that? Looks like a chicken wishbone, and that's how it got its name. And apparently, if you take like a little toothpick and play with that little wishbone, it'll cause the flower to close up. Kind of cool. So you have a plant you can play with too. It won't take your finger off, I promise. Likewise, look at those roots, just a little bit of pot bound here starting to follow the pot. Just pinch those a little bit with my fingers to open those up. Lovely. And I'm going to put that beautiful thick cascading habit right to the front of my container. Again, I would have several of these to tuck in. Move my foliage around a little bit. See here. And there we go. So you can see the wishbone flower really looks established here, cascading over the pot. Our Turnithera, our burgundy form here, this burgundy picks up the purple that's in the foliage, so they echo off each other very nice. Likewise, our textures are each a little different, our colors are just a little different, and it gives us a nice combination planter to enjoy the remaining of the season. Okay. Next, I'm going to take these out, and we're going to talk about indoor planting. So I know a lot of you are interested about that. You've stopped by my office, and we've chatted about different things that you might be able to use in your own apartment. Let's see, there's our euphorbia. We can just ease that out. It's going to be okay, and we can use that again. Leave it went in this pot. There we go. I'm going to tuck the soil back in those as well. Look at that. Firm that in real nice. Everybody's firmed in. Let's see, our last little container. There we go. Dust that off a little bit. Back in its little pot. Give it a sip of water because it's gone through a little bit of a. There we go. Water those back in, firm that back in place. When that one gets a little sip. And we can't leave the lantana out, it gets a sip too. So I'm going to freshen my soil back up. There we go. And get it even again for our next plants we're going to talk about. So, I've made a little bit of a mess here. One thing that I love to have in my bag of container tricks is a brush. Where's my brush? There it is. So my brush is handy for several reasons. One, can make quick work of kind of getting the bulk of my mess kind of quickly tidied over to the side. Oh, now we have a nice little And then I can take my dustpan and just brush that right back into it when I'm done and put it in the trash can. So that spot is kind of tidy for the next wave. And also, when I'm doing my container, a lot of times dirt gets on the edges. This one has more of a thin edge and doesn't collect as much. But a lot of times, when you're potting, when you're moving your plants around, you easily can get dirt collecting on the side. And I never water till everything's planted to the very end. Because as soon as you water and you haven't cleaned up, excuse me, here we go. I believe I
You knock yourself off.
My co-host Georgia will now happily fix me back. And my paintbrush, and this is just a little craft brush. And so while that soil is nice and dry, I can dust it back into the container and clean that edge up all nice before I water. Otherwise, once it gets wet and damp, it's a lot nastier to clean up. It makes smudges on your pot, and then you need to get a damp rag and clean it so you have a pretty pot when you're done. So let's talk about some of our indoor plants. This is called a ZZ plant right here. You've probably seen a few of these here at Cedar Field. They are a low to medium light plant. I think they're very versatile. You can see this one is, it's out, the container is kind of warped. This one is outgrowing its container. So let's see how easy this is to, I may make a face, I may be straining. Okay, so that's not coming out very easy. So one thing that can work when that doesn't come out is to roll your pot. Put a little pressure on it and roll it. I'm going to move it around, make sure it's not. See if that comes out any easier. Maybe not this go round. Okay. For our next trick, if that doesn't work, I'm going to take my pruners and I'm going to cut the container. We are going to cut Isn't this fun? Look at those roots. Wow. Now that is impressive roots, gang. Look at that. You can toss that to the side. That has some fabulous roots. Now, when I was looking at this plant, I picked a hefty one, and some of you are probably the same way. I'm going, I'm not going to plant this all in one hunk. I'm going to go in and divide these and have 2 or 3 to plant versus just one. So I tend to look at that with different plants so that instead of paying $17.99 for one plant, I've paid $17.99 for 2 or 3 plants. Now my plants are only costing $8 or $6 each. So I have a soil knife. Let's see where that, there's my soil knife. Now I realize a lot of people may not have this in their little arsenal of go-tos, but just a regular knife that you would eat with will do the same thing. It'll cut through those roots. So I'm looking at, right here I can see an easy division. I see this big nodule here of the root, so I know that that's a nice kind of individual plant grouping right there. Perhaps this one right here, and then the larger grouping over to the side. So I'm going to start, do this to the side here. First go down and just cut through that a little bit. Those roots are breaking up. Sound like I'm pulling teeth a little bit? Hear that? There we go. And so there is our first division. Now you can see where I cut through this part of that fleshy root and it's very moist. So I'm gonna set this over to the side, just a few minutes. And so you want that area of moisture, it's called, it's a type of hardening off. And so that will just get a light film on it. And that will protect it from getting any rot on it after it goes in the soil and gets watered. So you just set that over to the side a little minute and let that dry out. So now we're down to 2. Look at those roots. These are another amazing plant. They have fleshy roots like our asparagus fern did. For the same reason, they are water reservoirs, and that's why these are such an easy indoor plant, or ZZ plant, ZZ, easy to remember. And, you easily only need to water once a week, okay? So now, I'm going to go in and kind of do the same thing, just tease between those 2 plants. There we go. I hear it separating. Just wiggle that out. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Hair roots here. Just do it real easy. They separate. Look, they each have a fabulous root system left. And set that one here. And I'm going to set that one here. I'm going to take my handy dandy brush and clean up this mess that I've made. Get out over to the side so I'm not working in a whole dirt pile. Do we have a dustpan handy anywhere by chance? All right. So it's a lot of fun just before we ever get them in the pot. Now this little gem, this is a rabbit's foot fern. So this little plant is both, in my opinion, a filler. It's going to get full, and it's also a spiller. And it's called rabbit's foot because of these beautiful little velvet top roots that it gets. They're kind of an artificial root, if you will, and appendage that comes off the plant. And so that's going to look quite charming coming over to the side of that plant when it's done. Thank you, Co-host. Let's take a look at our rabbit's foot fern. Now you can see it has very shallow roots. A lot of that soil that was in the pot has no roots. And that's okay. That's kind of the nature. So they're very shallow rooted indoor plants. I actually put mine out on my shady porch out in the late spring when it's about 60 degrees steady, and it's out there now. And it loves it outside too, and then I bring it back in, usually around in late October when we're getting around 50 degrees. It will acclimate back to some cooler temperatures. You typically don't want to leave any of your indoor plants outdoors below 45 degrees. So just keep that in mind. Then this is a variegated pothos. Looks a lot like a philodendron. And this too, I went, look at all the plants inside of this pot. So, there we go. It has some decent roots. And a lot of times, to be honest, when our indoor plants are being propagated and planted, they are putting multiple plants in there to grow on and make a fuller pot, so when you're buying it. So it's kind of already set up for easy parting. See, this is so easy. We're having a plant party. Oh yeah. Okay. So now I have 3 nice little groupings that I'm going to use in the container. And our variegated pothos, right now it's all bushy, but this will also, as it matures, it will start to get some pieces that will cascade, just like a philodendron. So it too is a wonderful combo filler and spiller plant. Also very easy. require a lot of babying. All these that I'm showing you are going to be complement together as far as watering that plant once a week. Water and forget it. We have a rabbit's foot fern. And this is our Photonia. This typically, you'll see this in the garden center, either a green and white vein. This one is the pink vein variety. And it's just a pretty little foliage plant. You'll never see the first flower pretty much on any of these. It's really hard to find long-term indoor foliage plants that are going to offer a flowering venue. So you're looking at the foliage and the texture that's going to make up your garden. And likewise, this too, when it was planted, it's a series of plants. And I just kind of know this from my history working with plants and in the nursery and propagating, but now that may be a little secret that you didn't know, what to look for in our indoor plants when you're buying them. So instead of 3 pots, I have a little garden here that I can put in this container. Move a few things around. So before I plant that, I'm going to show you a couple things. So this little garden right here, this has just succulents in it. This likes a fair amount of light. This is from my house, and I have a kind of a more futuristic looking jade plant. This is a tubular jade, very different from our traditional one right here. This is actually a type of aloe vera plant, very different from what we're used to and seeing the more traditional aloe vera that all the leaves are very full of that wonderful aloe vera juice. This is a more stiff form. And we have several other little succulents, and I'll be honest, I don't know their name or what they are, but they're charming. And this one, you know, it kind of spills over to the side. I have this little cascading little plant here, and these are more upright. And our succulents, where's my brush? Do I cover it? I did. Need to paint the handle orange so I don't lose it. And so you can see how handy that is for me to dust off that soil that got on there from potting here. Then as I come around here, now this is an outdoor succulent. This is hens and chicks, and this is a gold form, very unusual. You can see how wonderful the gold is on that plant. I'm going to make a little space here up front. Talk to you about that. And so our succulents, you'll notice in each of these I have stones, and then I also have some ornamental faux stones in here. This is a pretty kind of pearl blue, and then some kind of bluish marbles. Each of these give a different texture and color, and I just thought how wonderful that would be to, instead of just the white stones, to add some color to bring out that nice yellow even more and add a little bit more interest. So that's why I did a combo. And so for these plants, you can see I've gone in here and just tucked stones underneath the foliage. The foliage really doesn't like to touch the soil. In their native habitat, excuse me, where they grow, they're more, I guess, desert-like. They're used to having much sandier soils. They like to be well drained. They do not like a lot of water. I typically probably water this. It's outdoors in the full sun, still just once a week, and it gets a very light watering. So each of these stones, I just gently push them underneath the plant so none of the foliage is touching soil. It's touching the stones, and so when I water, it hits the stones, goes down to the soil, it dries very quickly off the rock, and the plant is very happy. And that's why I did that with my indoor succulents as well. They can be quite moisture sensitive. And this little plant, this container, feels like it weighs 40 pounds for a little container. It's amazing how heavy this is. This is a nice glazed clay, and it's very thick. So if you're looking for a glazed container, You want to look for thickness, and I mean like the rim and the pot itself should be quite thick if you're going to use it outdoors, because that saves it, that thickness, from freezing and cracking over the winter. I've used glazed containers for years, and they do fabulous outside. I love the burst of color combinations that the glazes have. So this is in a shady nook in our garden over at the house, and I have a couple different little miniature hostas here, as well as two little succulents. These are two different little teardrop sedum, and then a little spruce sedum over here. You can see the textures are different and the colors. Now one thing, whether they're in a pot or in the ground, I'm going to pinch this leaf. We'll take a close-up here. You can see the leaf, if you look very close, right here. It's been nibbled on. We're going, what likes hosta leaves? Slugs like hosta leaves. And the slugs and the snails come out at night while we're sleeping and do their little nasty deed of nibbling on the leaves. So that's the result. Fortunately, there's not a lot. It's not like Swiss cheese, but if you see that, at least you know what's happening. Now, if you know what a sweet gum ball is, it's about yay big, and typically, if you know what that is, you don't want to step on a sweet gum ball. It's very prickly, but they work wonderful outdoors and indoors. If you take those, just like stones, and put those around your plants, the snails and slugs can't stand them. So they will not get to your hosta to munch on them, because they're not going to go over that zone, that ring, if you will, where you put the sweet gum balls around your plant. So there is a use for sweet gum balls. Surprise and happy times. And there's another little leaf that got nibbled on pretty well. And so I just went ahead and pinched that off to freshen up that plant. All right, let's finish up. So now my ZZ plants, I don't see any shining moisture here on the root now. They're dull, that means it's dried. Not all shiny and moist. See, that just took maybe 5 minutes. Now, let's take a close-up of our, where's my little packet? Where did it run off of here? Our super moist. Remember in the beginning of the show that I had just the dry granules right here. And I put those in about a 1/4 cup of water, and I put a teaspoon, not much. So I'm going to clear the spot off, and I'm going to show you. You can see already just in the cup. I'm going to dump that out and let you take a look at how much So that turned into that. And this feels a lot like Jell-O. It has kind of the same consistency. It's just, so those little granules absorbed all that water and turned into these nice little nuggets. Look like diamonds, don't you wish? Look at that. Diamonds for our soil. And so we only need just a handful of that to sprinkle. We would do that before we plant into our potting soil the same time we're putting in our fertilizer, and mix that up into our soil. It disappears, you don't see it, but it's going to help hold that moisture. So you can see how wonderful that stuff is, and what a surprise it is, what it turns into. Okay. Okay. So we're going to take So we want to kind of vibrate the plant a little bit, to put the soil around it, kind of help it filter down through those roots. Okay. That nice and straight. Get some of this back. It's on the table, we can use that, some good stuff, don't want to waste it. Wonderful. Okay. Voila. See how handy that little 89-cent brush is from Home Depot? Now, here's our bird's foot fern. Rest of that nice soil that came out of the pot. I'm going to tuck that over here to the side. Because I want that plant completely snugged up to the side. You can just shove that as close as you can get it and tuck. Press your soil around the roots. And that'll encourage those little rabbit's feet to come over the edge there and look rather nice and whimsical. Okay, back. I'm going to add another ZZ plant. This one's a little shorter. I'm going to pull that back a little bit so they're not side by side. They're offset a little bit. And just like it came out of the pot, we see this bulbous root here. We want to leave that up at the top, just like it came out of the pot. It's meant to be above the soil level. And so, the rest of the roots I'm going to tease down and bury those. Because if we buried that, it would not be happy. It would probably get some rot. So it likes that. Now, our other one didn't have so much of a bulbous root, and that's okay. That little piece got damaged a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and tease that off. Right. So next I'm going to be tucking in some of these nice variegated pothos. You can see the beautiful variegation there. Some nice light roots. I'm going to put one over here. There we go. Because we know that's going to cascade down the road as it starts to grow. And we can have some nice trailing pieces right here going down the side of the pot. And that variegation helps pop the other greens in the mix. That's why I always tend to have some nice variegated pieces in my mixes, because it really helps the others. They all work together and become a much more beautiful arrangement in the process. And I ended up with 3 nice clumps of those when I divided those out of the pot. I'm going to put another one in between the 2 ZZ plants. And I'm going to choose the other one because it's a little bit fuller. So I have a little bit more space in this pocket than I do on the other side. Again, I'm tucking that just right up to the edge of the pot there. Right there. And so I'm basically then just putting the soil around the other half of the plant, because the other half's right up here to the side of the wall. The roots will just go right down there as it grows. It will automatically happen. Rotator plant. And my last little clump here of variegated pothos. Tuck that in. Perfect. Starting to take shape. And so we have left our nice little tonia here. Oops. Let's get this one. Have a piece that went astray that came untucked. All right. So now in tight little places, so I have a small plant. In the spring especially, we will have a small plug. So something else in my little bag of tricks are 2 things. A wooden spoon is something that I would recommend having. It helps you get in a tight spot, pull that makes just a perfect little small size pocket for that little plant to tuck into. And then look at the size of this one, very small. Knitting needles are a perfect friend. You take that knitting needle and you can just rotate it in a circular fashion, and that circular fashion will make just a nice little divot in the soil, just a perfect little pocket to tuck that down into. Push that over. I'm going to make another little pocket here. Use the spoon again. There we go. Plant is going in. Tuck it in with my fingers there, firm it in very nice. And that one's a little crooked. Push down on that so it's nice and straight. Let's put our fingers through that fern a little bit. Fluff that up. Take a look at it. Now our last little piece, I can see that I have room for it now. So I'm going to go right behind our fern. And put that in, of course. If you had several containers, you could divide this up. So that's going to go in there. And now we have a very charming arrangement for an indoor plant that's going to do well for you in low to medium light. You're going to water it once a week. Now that I'm all done, I'm going to check for any soil on my container, give it a nice little brush off to clean that up. And my last step then is going to be watering everything in to get that soil just to tuck in around all those roots. And then I will do that a week from now. Find my favorite spot where I've planned to have this, and we'll have our beautiful foliage plant. And one last tidbit is, now this is on a Lazy Susan, so it rotates nice for me. For your indoor plants, they're typically only getting light from one direction, possibly two. So if I'm the window, the foliage is going to come back toward me eventually, kind of bend toward the light. So every couple of weeks, I rotate that plant a little bit, and it bends, and then, so that way you have a more full plant that's not just bending in one direction. So just remember to rotate your indoor plants. They'll be happier and perkier, and you will enjoy either your indoor gardening or your outdoor gardening. And I hope to be back again in the spring to visit some spring planting choices. Thank you so much for joining me today in the garden with Beth Burrell. Goodbye and good afternoon.